Hi everyone. I have another video today. I want to return today to the topic that we were going over before a couple months ago. And this is how to come up with video game ideas. And I already did a couple of videos about this, but today my tip for you is when you're trying to come up with ideas for a game that you can do, draw from real life. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about what I mean by that, how you can look for things in real life to inspire you, and go over some examples. Now, usually for the examples I do for these videos, I like to choose games that I've played myself, but when I was doing research for this, there were a lot that I hadn't played. So I'll probably go back and look at some of these deeper and play them myself. But if you want to learn more about how some of these tips can be applied to your game ideas, I encourage you to go and look up some of these games yourself as well. So, with that being said, let's get started. All right, and if you think of a lot of games out there, it might seem like a lot of them are based on fantasy and extraordinary events that you wouldn't really think would happen in real life. And, you know, it is true that there are a lot of games like that. And there are things like mythical creatures like, dragons and griffins and all sorts of things like that that you won't find in real life. Also, fictional worlds that don't really exist that probably, in many cases, don't have the same physical laws that we have in our real world. And they might also have people in those worlds that have abilities and powers that we don't see in real life, like magic, for instance, or like superhuman powers, things like that. All right. But, there are a lot of games that are out there like that, and that's okay. But I will also encourage you, it might sound obvious, but keep an open mind here because the real world can also be a great source for game ideas. And some of the ways that we're going to look at might be real world settings and locations, real world time periods, um, events, past and present, that happened in the real world. And also, you might not think of this as much, but everyday situations and mundane tasks can also be good sources for game ideas. So let's go over some examples. So, some games out there that are based on real events, settings, and people. Now, I will say, if you're going to base games on people, be careful, especially if those people are still alive or around or, have been around in the recent past. Because, you don't want to like slander someone or offend anyone or, so just use your discretion. But that being said, um, with this topic, um, these are games that you can look at that have like a historical or real world basis. Um, the historical accuracy and like the fidelity or commitment to the actual sequence of events might vary, so you might take some creative liberties with them, but really these games are inspired or based on real life situations. And you can see these examples all the way back from ancient history to even current everyday challenges and settings and situations. All right. So just some examples. Oregon Trail, a popular one, especially if you're a bit older or around, maybe like a millennial or Gen X or before. It was a historical game about settlers moving to the American West, and you had your covered wagon, and you had to avoid sickness, you had to hunt, you had to buy supplies, and all that stuff. Really fun game. Civilization, which is a strategy game where you build your version of real historical and current civilizations. And it could be like the Roman Empire, Ottoman Empire, the Zulu Empire, uh, all sorts of empires and civilizations throughout history. And you get to play as and compete with historical figures. So maybe you could be Napoleon, or maybe you could be Shaka Zulu, or so on. And these are, of course, based on real people and events and cultures. And you can actually learn a lot from this game too if you do a lot of the read a lot of the material that they have in the game. For a lot of this category, I saw a lot of war games, like Call of Duty, for instance, which is a series of shooter games that are based on real wars. So I think there's World War II games in this series, Vietnam War, maybe Desert Storm, uh, all sorts of games like this in the Call of Duty series. And then, like I said, there were a lot of other games in this sort of genre that were based on wars throughout history, a lot of shooter games. Assassin's Creed, another popular one. It's a series of adventure and stealth games that take place in a variety of historical backdrops. And this is where you get a lot of the ancient history. So I think they even had like ancient Egyptian, all the way up to more recent times, like the golden age of pirates, just all sorts of different countries and time periods. Dynasty Warriors, a game based on China's Three Kingdoms era at the end of the Han Dynasty. Um, and a more recent example, L.A. Noire. It's a crime-solving adventure based in 1940s Los Angeles with real buildings and landmarks where you play as a detective solving crimes. And there's places that, if you are familiar with LA, you might recognize some of these places. Kingdom Come Deliverance, an RPG that's set in the medieval kingdom of Bohemia around the time of the Holy Roman Empire, based on some real events. Um, Jeanne d'Arc, an RPG based on French heroine and historical figure Joan of Arc. And I think there's also other historical games based on Mozart and some other people as well. And then just to close this one out, um, a real recent, very close to home real life situation. There's a game called That Dragon, Cancer, which is actually an autobiographical story game of real life parents who are dealing with their son's battle with cancer. So, that was, I think, a much more emotional and personally relatable game for a lot of people that was based on real events. Okay, so those are some games you might want to go back and try out for yourself. Simulations, another way that you can bring the real world into gaming. So these are games that generally, but not always, try to create a more accurate sandbox environment that recreates a real process, right? So with some of these other games that I mentioned before, they took a lot of creative liberty, and you might have a game that's based on real life, but um, they add like magic or something to it, something that is still taking you away from the reality of the world. So for the simulations, I tried to choose games that were more um, true to the real life process. And in these games, usually players can play more freely. It's more open-ended experience, without like a linear or without like a set, this is what you have to do to win the game um, framework. And you'll see here that there's some, even some like mundane, seemingly boring tasks that show up in these simulations. So, some examples: house flipper, where if you flip a house, that's where you buy like a rundown house or property and you fix it up and repair it and you make improvements and then sell it for profit. So there's a house flipper simulation. Power washing, all right, that's when you get like a highly pressurized water hose that you can use to spray off dirt and gunk from the sides of buildings and floors and the ground and things like that. There's actually a power wash simulator where you can manage a cleaning business and use a power washer to remove gunk from clients' property. So like, who knew? Who would have thought that you would be able to make a game out of power washing? Microsoft Flight Simulator. You get to sit in the pilot seat and you get to fly in-game simulated um, airplane models that are based on real life aircraft. So if you're an aviation nut in real life, that's the type of game that you might like to play, or maybe you could make a game like that. There's a truck driver simulation where you can start your own career as a truck driver, making deliveries and making money. And, they have some that I think are in the US, and there's, I think, a Euro truck driver simulation. So, there's that. There's a lot of farming simulators where you can run your own farms. And a lot of times you'll find these tucked into other games that are in a more unrealistic settings, like RPG settings. So I think like Stardew Valley is a popular example, but then like Rune Factory and other games like that. Here's a game that I found on Steam that it's not released yet, I don't think. Rebooker, where if you've ever wanted to be an airline gate agent in an airport, the people who take tickets and who make sure everybody gets on the plane and everything, here's your chance apparently to do that. So somebody saw that and thought, hey, this could be a good game or simulator. So I think that's not released yet, but it should be coming out. There's also an animal shelter simulator where you can adopt and care for virtual pets and animals. You can um, buy them things, dress them up, take care of them, get them food, all sorts of things like that, like you might do with a real pet. And then, again, another example of a simulator of real life stuff tucked into fiction, Sakuna of Rice and Ruin. So this is a side-scrolling action RPG, and this actually has an accurate rice farming simulator inside of that game itself. And it's so accurate that I believe, from my research, I saw that it actually links you to Japan's um, Ministry of Agriculture page on rice farming. So, this is really tying in the real world stuff into a game or simulator. All right. So those are some examples that you might want to go back and look at. And the last real thing, set of examples I'm going to talk about is um, where games where you take daily tasks and situations and try to approach them in weird and different and interesting ways. So, this is different from simulators because in a lot of cases they might be based on real world tasks, but they're generally not as process accurate as simulators. All right. So like with Microsoft Flight Simulator, that is a more accurate, like if I'm a pilot, I could sit down and be like, oh yeah, this is like how I would close to how I would actually fly in real life. These games, not so much. The first one is Parking Jam, which is more of a casual puzzle game where your objective is to move cars to get them out of crowded parking lots, but you have to like drag and drop the cars. And it's kind of like a spatial puzzle sort of challenge. Um, so, parking lots, real life, kind of a boring thing, but somebody made it into a game. If you've ever played Diner Dash, that's where you are running a diner, and this is, I think, more like a resource management game. You're trying to get hungry customers their orders, their correct orders, on time before they get frustrated and leave your restaurant, right? And there's actually a couple of food related things on here. Cake Mama, where it's another uh, baking or cooking game. Iron Chef America, if you know the Iron Chef show that comes on like the Food Network, they actually came out with a game called Supreme Cuisine, where you take the role of a cook. You can go to cooking school, you can try out a career mode, and you can actually face off against opponents in the kitchen like they do on the show. All right. If you've ever thought, can a legal career also make a good video game? Well, yes, it can. Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, where you take on the role of a lawyer and you actually take on cases, you hear evidence, you get clues, you talk to people, go through the legal process of hearings and discovery, all the way to court, right? Another professional, real life career, Crazy Taxi. So you get to drive a cab, but it's not really a real life simulator because you get to do all sorts of things, break all the rules of the road and defy physics, and do all sorts of things to make sure that hey, as long as you get your passenger to their destination, it doesn't matter how many accidents you cause, you get paid. If you're into fashion, The Bratz dolls, there's a game called Bratz Rhythm and Style where younger players can customize outfits in the game. So that's wrapping the real world of fashion into a game. Another one I saw, I don't know if this is out yet. I think it might be out, but I saw this on Steam. It's called Get to Work, where you take the role of a stressed out office worker and you put on your rollerblades to navigate your way through your neighborhood downtown trying to get to the office on time. And you got all sorts of physical obstacles and things like that to try to climb the corporate ladder all on rollerblades. So again, another boring task, got to get to work. Now we made it into a game. And this is another weird one that I saw. Vacuum Warrior. Again, I don't know if this is out yet, but kind of like the power wash thing. If you're into vacuuming, I guess they found a way to make vacuuming fun. Um, you can customize your vacuum cleaner, upgrade it, and do whatever you need to do to dust, bust, and grime in your house in this casual game. So probably more fun than the real thing, but there you go. And then to close this one out, if anybody ever played Paperboy on Nintendo or arcade, that's where your character, you're biking through a neighborhood, the old paper routes where people used to do where the kids would be on bike and they'd have to toss the newspaper to the people's houses so that the people could come out and get their newspaper on the front porch. And so this is what you're doing in this game, but you're trying to avoid dogs and potholes and cars, all while getting the newspapers to where they're supposed to be. So that's an oldie but a goodie um, situation where you took a real world situation that might seem kind of boring or, not so much of a gaming um, candidate, and they actually made it into a really good game. All right. So, that being said, you've got a lot of examples that you can go back and try, and hopefully gave you some inspiration. If you need help for game ideas, look around you. Are there tasks, events, or historical figures that inspire you? Maybe you pay attention in history class or art class or whatever the case may be, and something will stick out to you that you could say, hey, this could be a good basis for a game. Or, you can make a game that's based entirely on a real world mechanic and integrate it into the story, right? So maybe it's not necessarily any historical figure, but just something every day that you do, like cooking. That could be like a whole game itself, or you could add it in the mini game, like with, Legend of Zelda, for instance. A lot of those games, like the Breath of the Wild, for instance, they have cooking mini games or those games that we saw before, right? Well, as we saw, even boring chores can become a game idea. So in real life, if you have a chore that you have to do, like you have to clean up your room, is there a way that you can add some challenge to that? Like maybe you're cleaning up your room, can you put a time limit on yourself and see, can I get it done in 5 minutes? If you can do it in real life, you can definitely roll that into a video game and also add some kind of fantastical, non-realistic um, enhancements to the challenge in the game as well. So, like what we saw with the parking garage or the parking lot, you can't drag and drop cars with the mouse to clear them out. But it is a real world, sort of boring task. But you have the power of virtual reality and computer mechanics to make it a little more fun. Okay, so hopefully, this has given you some ideas for how you can come up with some game ideas. Check out the other videos in this series and, just let me know if you have any thoughts on this. Thanks again, and enjoy your day and continue to check back. All right. Bye, guys.